This happened years ago. It happened at my old childhood home. I had a few weird things happen to me in that house, but this was by far the strangest. I woke up in the middle of the night. For starters, I was maybe 7 or 8, and waking up in the middle of the night wasn't something that usually happened to me. As my eyes were closed and sleep was still clouding over my body, I didn't feel the issue at first. The room was warm, and I didn't realize what was wrong until I opened my eyes. When I opened them, I was greeted with the strangest thing I've ever seen. My arms were up in the air, standing straight in the air like I was hailing Hydra or something. So I see this, and I'm immediately confused. Why are my arms in the air like this? Why is this happening? I go to pull them down, and to my absolute horror, my arms start hurting. Like, imagine standing in one position for a long time, and then going to sit. Your bones start to feel weird. That was how my arms felt, like they had been up in the air for hours. It was like breaking plaster or cracking a very thin sheet of ice. When I finally got them down, I remember laying in bed and staring up at the ceiling in confusion. I finally went to sleep, but not without nearly every joint in both arms stinging in pain. If somebody else has woken up in this way before, definitely be sure to leave it in a comment or something, because I have never heard of this before. The detail about how it felt when they pulled their arms back down is kind of what made this for me. Like, that makes it sound like their arms were literally standing up there for like hours. So this just happened last week. I work at a warehouse, and I was loading an empty trailer with a pallet jack. Once I filled it up with around 30 pallets of merchandise, I decided to have one last look and inspect everything one last time before I closed it up and got it ready to send on its way. I walked halfway inside the trailer when I saw my boss standing in there. I froze and I called out to him. I'm like, "Alex, why did you come in here?" He turned around and he was unusually pale. He completely ignored me and walked out. This is not like him. Alex never ignores me. I walked out confused, went to his office, and the lights were out. I asked my coworker, why was Alex inside the container I was loading? She responded, "What? That's impossible. He left on an errand like 20 minutes ago and he hasn't come back yet." I didn't believe her, so I went to the parking lot, and sure enough, his car wasn't there. Once I saw that, I felt dizzy and felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I still have the image fresh in my mind of what I saw in there. I saw him, but like I mentioned, it was like a different version of him. He looked pale, and he completely ignored me as if he didn't see me. Afterwards, a sheriff came and told us Alex had just been in a nasty car accident. He didn't make it. I am beyond terrified to go back to work, but I have to. I can't explain what happened. No, I don't do drugs, nothing like that. I know what I saw, I just hope he doesn't keep appearing. When I was about 17, I was playing football, soccer for my American friends, with my mates at the park. I jumped up to head the ball. I'm a pretty short dude, not exactly the most athletic person, so it's not like I was trying to jump like Michael Jordan or anything, but I can safely say I've never jumped higher than I did that time, before or since. It felt like I wasn't going to stop. When I reached my apex, I stopped mid-air. It was only for a brief moment, but I felt my body become weightless before I began my descent. I'm trying my best not to say I floated, but that's how it felt. I wasn't even going to bring it up with my friends at the time, although it confused me. I knew if I said anything, they would have just shrugged me off, so I wasn't going to bother. It wasn't until everyone was asking me how I was able to jump so high and saying that they saw me stop midair that I started to freak out. I saw my grandma when she was in an entirely different country. I always try to look for the logical reasoning behind a weird occurrence, but this experience, man, I have no idea how I could even try to explain it. Back in 2015, my mother and I were returning from the mall after doing some last-minute prom shopping. Unfortunately, we left just as rush hour started. Anyone who lives in a city knows how nightmarish rush hour can get. I had this urge to look out the driver's side window, and I spotted my grandma in the car next to us. It was even the same make and model that she always drove. At first I thought, what a coincidence that she was on the same road as us. I remember pointing her out to my mother, who did a double take and murmured something about how she didn't realize my grandma was back from vacation. I had completely forgotten she was in Mexico and that she also lived 2 hours away from us. The woman beside us had everything my grandma had. The same mole, glasses, the same assortment of beads and air fresheners hanging from her mirror. It was her, but when we tried to get her attention, she didn't seem to notice us, or maybe she was ignoring us. Either way, she ended up turning off the highway. When we got home, I ran to my room and checked Facebook, her go-to social media. She just posted a recent picture of her swimming in the ocean, still in Mexico. I messaged her to ensure she was still on vacation, and lo and behold, she was. I told my mom, and she explained that we must have just seen someone that looked exactly like her. I would generally accept that explanation if it weren't for all the items and defining features that confirmed the woman was, in fact, my grandmother. I have no idea what happened that day. Me and someone I used to know in high school way back met to catch up. We were talking about our views on religion at some park. When we were walking back to our cars, some guy said he overheard us. We interacted a little and then went to our cars. I told her how awkward I felt knowing he overheard everything. She looked at me and said, "He?" After some comparing notes, we realized we'd seen and heard entirely different people. She'd seen an elderly woman, and I'd seen a middle-aged man. Only problem is, we only talked to the one person. I am not a superstitious person, nor do I believe in magic, psychic powers, or anything of the sort. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for this, but I haven't figured it out. That, or it's a sleepy-brained coincidence. When I was a little girl, I had a babysitter, let's call her Delilah, and Delilah's mother worked as my family's housekeeper. Delilah looked after me all the time, so I knew her face very well. Years later, when I was a teenager and hadn't seen Delilah in a few years, I woke up groggy one morning and looked out the window into the front driveway, and I saw Delilah walking towards the house, visibly pregnant. I remember thinking, oh, good for her, congrats. I assumed she was stopping by to say hi to my parents and expected to see her and catch up once I was up and about. But when I left my room, she was nowhere to be seen, so I just assumed she left quickly and didn't think much of it. The next day, her mother came by to do the housekeeping, and I said something like, "Oh, I saw Delilah yesterday. I didn't know she was pregnant. Congrats." To which her mother stared at me and said, "Delilah's in Australia, and she has been for like 3 months." I was confused because I had been sure it was Delilah, and we had a long driveway, so it didn't make much sense for a random woman to be walking up so close to the front door. But I assumed I must have been mistaken. I did get a chance to see her and catch up with her once she came back from Australia, and as it turned out, she was pregnant. One summer afternoon, me and my family had gone to the pool. Yes, a public pool. It was around 2012. I was about 7 years old. I brought a special toy that I had had since I was 4 years old, and it was designed to be played with in pools. We get to the pool, I play around with my toy, swim around for about 2 hours, until my parents had finally decided to go home. When we get home, I realize that I didn't have my toy. I frantically check everywhere in the car, under the seats, in the cup holder, everywhere, and I couldn't find it. Fast forward about 7 years later in 2019. I'm in my bedroom, sitting on my bed. I'm on my phone when I feel something hit the top of my head and fall onto the ground below me. I checked to see what it was, and lo and behold, it was my specialty designed toy I had played with 7 years ago at the public pool. I pick it up, and it was definitely it. It even had the same dent in it as mine. I turned from surprise to confusion to complete terror. Keep in mind, my family had moved houses not long ago. Alright. What? This would have already made zero sense if it was in the same house, but apparently this was 7 years later in a completely different house. And what, apparently it just fell out of thin air? It's not like the toy was in the ceiling or something, so I just don't know what to make of this one. Around freshman year, I was in my school's beginner band and was having a lot of fun in it. We were all newish to our instruments and we were just trying our best. I made some of my best memories in that class, and it helped me get up to the level of playing that I'm at now. We were out in the audience of our spring concert watching one of the other ensembles perform. They were the intermediate level and were doing pretty well, and honestly, we were just waiting for our turn to perform. It was really entertaining for us newbies, though, because we rarely got to hear them play. Something weird happened at that concert, though. Something that I'll remember forever. In the middle of one of their songs, I think it was a Celtic song, everything just froze. All the players, all the audience members, everyone except me and the girl sitting next to me. It was a surreal moment because we had actually listened to the song before, and there wasn't a pause in the music at that moment, nor in any parts of the song. The girl and I looked at each other for a moment before everything resumed as normal, as though nobody had noticed it happened at all. The girl next to me jokingly said, "Oh, there was a glitch in the Matrix," before we continued to watch the concert. I think about that comment a lot because I genuinely think it was a reality glitch. Nothing like that has ever happened to me since. When I was maybe 2 or 3, my mom was taking me to be babysat. From the driver's seat, she could hear me whispering and occasionally giggling from the back seat. She couldn't really look back as she was driving, but from the rearview mirror, it looked as if I was talking to someone sitting right next to me, even though no one else was in the car with us. Thinking it was just another one of my imaginary friends, she curiously asks, "Who are you talking to?" I answered, "I'm talking to my grandmother." The thing was, I hadn't seen my maternal grandmother since I was a baby, since she and my mom weren't speaking to each other. And even if that's who I was talking about, my maternal grandmother was in another state entirely. Confused, my mom says, "What do you mean?" Without missing a beat, I say to her, "My dad's mom," in an exasperated tone someone might use while saying something like, "Duh, obviously." The answer spooked her because my paternal grandmother was dead. It's hard for toddlers to recognize people they hardly know, let alone grasp the concept of their parents having parents. So my mom was momentarily shocked I knew Dad's mom meant grandmother and that I was apparently talking to her. Despite being stunned, she tried asking me questions like, "Oh, she's with you? What's she saying?" I started to answer, but quickly looked away to the seat next to me as if I had been distracted by someone speaking. Then I started making a shushing noise, ducking my head and giggling like I was mimicking someone doing the same thing. Since she was in the middle of driving, my mom had to settle for glancing back at me. It was like that for the rest of the drive. The thing is, I actually remember this happening. Not in as much detail as my mom, but I do have a hazy memory of being in the back seat of the car, my mom calling me from the front and looking at me through the rearview mirror. When I was about to answer my mom's questions, I looked over because someone was frantically hushing me. I looked over and there was a woman there. I don't remember the details of her face, but I remember she was bathed in warm tones as if she was sitting in sunlight. She had a kind smile. I remember thinking she looked pretty. She was shushing me with a finger to her lips as if to say, "Don't tell." I did the same, and then we both laughed as if we shared a secret or an inside joke. My grandmother has a cursed necklace. When I was around 12, my grandma pulled out her jewelry box for me to look through. She was showing me all her gold rings and necklaces and said I could keep one. I was searching through the box and came across a goldish bronze necklace with a big charm spelling out Mom. It intrigued me and I asked her about it. Apparently my dad got it for her while deployed many years ago. "Do you still wear it?" I asked her. "No," she replied, and told me that she believes the necklace is responsible for people's deaths. She said when she was wearing it, the charm would always come off, which is impossible unless someone cut the metal. Whoever picked up the charm would always experience their father passing away hours or days later. One time my grandma was at church when the charm came off, and her church friend found it and gave it back to her. Soon after, the woman found out her father had passed of a heart attack. Another time, her coworker picked up the charm and her father later died of a heart attack. This happened around 5 times before my grandmother stopped wearing the necklace. This story isn't too long, but it's one of the only things that still gives me goosebumps when I think back on it. Back when my youngest sister was around 5 or 6, so roughly 12 years ago, my mom, the sister, and I were upstairs watching some series on TV. Out of nowhere, my sister turns to my mother and says, as I vividly remember, in these exact words, "Mommy, do you remember when I was in your tummy and I died and it made you sad? But it's okay now because I came back and you're happy." I looked at my mom and she was pale and holding back tears. Something that my parents only ever told me as the eldest child. The year before my youngest sister was born, my mom had a miscarriage. I'm not religious, and as much as supernatural stories interest me, I don't really believe in the paranormal, but man, other than kids saying random things, I can't explain that day away. Yeah, we've seen stories like this one before where kids just seem to know things or have experienced things that they just couldn't have. What does this mean? Are children just like on a completely different wavelength from the rest of us? I lived at this house for all my childhood and a pretty big chunk of my teen years, so obviously I had gotten familiar with the roads driving home. I remember as a child there was one specific road that always had me looking out of my window. On that road was a huge curved tree that looked like it was going to fall at any moment, and I would tell my mom about how the tree freaked me out, afraid it was going to fall. A few years go by and I'm driving on the same nostalgic road again. I look up to see that tree that always freaked me out as a kid. It was gone. I pointed out to my mom, telling her that it must have been cut down and how that saddened me in a way. She told me she didn't remember. I shrug it off, knowing I shouldn't expect her to remember since it was years ago. Only a few months ago, one of my cousins is moving into an apartment near that road. I'm helping him unpack, and as I'm walking out of the house to get more of his stuff from out of the car, I see a neighbor. He was an old man. I immediately knew it was my chance to ask someone who lived in the area about the tree. I made a conversation and bring it up. He gives me a confused and almost horrified look on his face. He asked me how I knew about it. The city had cut it down because of an incident where someone had crashed into it during a panic attack episode. Years ago, way before I was even born. I just remember going home that night, confused, scared, and many other emotions I had never experienced before. Not a scary ghost story, but a wholesome one. In the summer of 2019, I was back in my hometown over my college summer break. My grandfather was in hospice care after battling with prostate cancer for 3 years, and we knew any day he could pass. My mom and other family members visited almost every day, and I would try to visit as much as I could while also working a full-time job. In late July that year, I was at work and I needed to go grab a phone charger out of my car. As soon as I opened my car door, I was hit with the overpowering smell of oranges. I was so taken back by it, I searched my car top to bottom to see if I could find the source of the smell. There was absolutely nothing. My car was clean, and I didn't have an air freshener in it. Weird, but I carried on with my day and forgot about it. An hour later, I get a call from my mom telling me that my grandfather passed away. I leave work early and notice that the orange smell is gone in my car. I'm still confused, but I don't think about it too much. When I get home, I obviously discuss the recent passing with my mom and help to console her. She wasn't at the hospice care center when he passed, but one of my aunts was. Later on in conversation, she mentions that when my aunt ran to grab a nurse to tell them what happened, she walked back in the room and noticed an overpowering smell of oranges. It was odd enough that the nurse who came in the room commented on the smell. My mom then tells me that a few days before, she told my grandfather to give her a sign that when he passes, he was all right, and she thinks that was the sign. For context, every year my mom would ask my grandfather what he wanted for Christmas, and he would always tell her that the love of his family was all that he needed. So my mom would jokingly get him some oranges and peanuts in a stocking like he used to get as a child. My grandfather absolutely loved oranges as well, so my mom would bring him a bunch when we came to visit. As soon as my mom tells me this, alarm bells start going off in my head. I ask her what time he passed, and it lined up exactly with when I also smelled the orange citrus scent in my car. Freaking out a bit, I tell her what I experienced, and she stares at me in awe. She was on the fence about the citrus smell in the hospice center being a sign, but combined with my experience and the timing, we were both convinced.